When Ontario police officers are involved in an incident where somebody gets injured or dies, the province's Special Investigations Unit by law intervenes and determines whether charges are warranted. For 5 years, Ian Scott has been at the helm of the SIU, and he joins us now for an exit interview on what he's learned and how things could be improved. Welcome. Nice to have you here at TVO.
Thanks for having me.
And again, for people of a certain generation, and you've heard this before, I always feel a need to say, you're the other Ian Scott, aren't you?
I still get referred to as the other Ian Scott by people of your generation. That's true. There's a whole new generation that actually think I'm perhaps the Ian Scott, right?
That's right.
Ian Scott, yes.
Because for those who remember, Ian Scott was the Attorney General of Ontario when David Peterson was Premier.
Yes, and was my boss for a number of years as well.
Yes, indeed. Well, for those, again, who don't know as much about the SIU as we would like them to, let's put this primer up to start with, Control Room, if we can, just to remind everybody that this is an Ontario civilian police oversight agency that was formed in 1990. It investigates incidents of serious injury, death, or allegations of sexual assault. It has jurisdiction over 57 police services and 28,000 officers. The staff of the SIU are former police officers and civilians. And the SIU director, that's you, can charge police officers. Okay, that's some of the background.
Yes.
You're leaving second week in October.
Correct.
When we'll get a new SIU head named Tony Laparco.
That's correct.
How did he get chosen?
Well, it's an order in council appointment, so it's a cabinet appointment as a recommendation through the Attorney General. And he'd go through, like I did, a selection process. But typically they are Crown attorneys, and my background really is as a prosecutor, doing both trials and appeals.
And do you seek the job, or does the job seek you?
Well, I'm not sure about Tony, but I did apply for the job myself. I'm assuming he was interested in putting an application.
Gotcha. Let's look at some of the numbers here over the course of the last several years, some of which predates your time here. If we look at the number of cases that have been investigated by the Special Investigations Unit over the years, and we're going to go back more than a decade, we see that it started in 2001, 2002 at 162, dipped as the years went on, but then under your tenure, the number is almost double from where it was a little over a decade ago. Now that's cases investigated.
True.
Let's put on the next slide, which shows the percentage of cases resulting in charges laid, and we see that the numbers kind of bounce around a bit, but then again, over the last couple of years, it peaks over that decade or more at about 4.1%. Now, I guess the question I want to start with is, if only 4% of your investigations are leading to charges being laid, do we assume that in 96% of the cases that you're investigating, the police acted appropriately?
That's a fair assumption. That is. We have a screening process, actually. There's a screening process when cases are phoned into the SIU. And we determine whether we have jurisdiction over the offense or the incident. And usually the big issue is over serious injury. I mean, death is reasonably easy to figure out. Allegations of sexual assault, we do those investigations. But the biggest area are the injury area. And there's often a discussion between the intake supervisor and, say, the police service that calls in as to whether we're going to look into it and do an investigation. So, for example, there are about 380 cases last year where we did an investigation. But about 40% of those cases we get out of reasonably quickly, because either it doesn't fit the jurisdiction, we get into it a little further, by the medical records don't indicate that, according to our definition of serious injury, it's that serious, or alternatively, we decide there's patently nothing to investigate. For the rest of it, we do a complete investigation, and I read all of these reports and decide whether or not a criminal charge should be laid.
You know, for those who are a little more suspicious of police activity, they may say, this just goes to prove, if you're only charging 4% of the cops you investigate, that you guys aren't tough enough. I mean, you've heard the criticism before,
Sure.
Obviously. What do you say to it?
Well, I determine each case upon its facts. I mean, the nature of policing is such that they're going to be involved in cases where there is death and serious injury. It's an inevitable aspect of when you have the exclusive mandate to use force.
André Marin, whom you know, the Ombudsman,
quite well, yes.
Ombudsman for the province of Ontario, said there was a perception that the SIU is, quote, a toothless tiger. Again, going to this 4% charged, 96% not charged. Do those numbers, again, suggest he's onto something?
Well, if you look at the first report, there's actually two reports. There's a report in 2008 and a report in 2011. The comments you're making relate to the 2008 report. I know it well because I literally came in on the precipice of that report being issued. Maybe I wish they told me at my interview that this report was coming down the pike, but that was not the case. I was well lined up to take the job over when it came in. He actually talks quite specifically about the charge rate and whether or not that's really relevant to determining the efficacy of the SIU. And I think we have to be careful of this issue. I mean, I think there are other issues where his comments are quite well taken about it having the perception of a quote-unquote toothless tiger back then. But I don't think that's the charge rate. The charge rate, I think, relates to really the law that you apply to the facts that you get. And as I indicated earlier, it's the nature of policing that they're going to be involved in a number of incidents where there's going to be serious injury and death. And I'm kind of glad that the numbers went up during my tenure because it did indicate that the police services were taking the SIU more seriously. It also indicated that we were getting calls from other sources, particularly the media, complainants themselves, although frankly not that many, but also defense lawyers who were representing clients that were injured during the course of an arrest.
Is it hard to charge a cop?
I don't find it particularly hard. I mean, what I do is apply the law to the facts, and the legislation is very clear. If I have reasonable grounds to believe criminal offense has taken place, I shall lay a charge, and I do that. And as you know, I'm just coming up to about 5 years, and I think I've laid approximately 55 charges during my tenure.
And how would you, I mean, does that feel about right for you?
Oh, well, it's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to look into all the other directors and determine how they use their discretion in laying charges. Mm-hmm. But I certainly, I try to look at every case quite seriously. A lot of cases are reasonably easy to make that decision on, and some I struggle with.
And it's your decision?
It's my decision. Now, after I make the decision, it goes to a branch of the Crown Law Criminal, which is the sort of headquarters for the Ministry of the Attorney General on the criminal side. And there's a branch there called the Justice Prosecutions Branch. And it does all these prosecutions. And I used to be the head of that branch, so I know it very well. And there's a couple of very strong sort of screening processes that take place. One is a Crown has to review the case and determine at a different standard whether there's a reasonable prospect of conviction. And also, like all criminal cases, things can change between the time the charge is laid and the time it gets to court.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's really the ultimate oversight, which is the criminal justice system. The prosecutor has to present a case in court in which satisfies a judge or a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual before the court is guilty.
I don't envy your job, though, because this is one of those jobs where, of course, some members of the public think you're not tough enough on the police. The head of the police union in Toronto, Mike McCormick, has called for your resignation numerous times, I think, because he thinks you're too tough on the police. How do you find the balance?
Well, once again, it's my concern is that there are thorough investigations being done. The law, I like to think, this sort of latter part of my life, I understand the law that applies to these circumstances.
But it's all judgment, right? I mean, these are human judgments at the end of the day that either are made or are not made.
True. The whole criminal justice process is a human process. And at the end of the day, we all struggle with some of the aspects to it. And we all know, because of some notorious cases that have come out in the past that have even gone through entire jury trials where we've understood many years later there's been miscarriages of justice. So we struggle and do the best we can in the criminal justice system. And I'm part of that process. And you're right. I mean, it's not a popularity contest. I often say there are two lineups outside the SIU. There's a line of disgruntled police officers, and there's a line of disgruntled complainants and their families. Because every time you make a call on one of these more high-profile issues, there's someone who's pretty unhappy.
Well, let's just put that first graphic up again if we can, Control Room, because the charges did, under your tenure, almost double. And I mean, the obvious question is, are the police twice as bad now as when you took over?
Well, of course, the numbers have gone up significantly. So as a percentage, the percentage has not gone up significantly. But I may have a different view of what it means to have reasonable grounds to believe a criminal offense took place than, say, some of my predecessors. I can't make that call for them.
Let's put up some more numbers here. This is an Ipsos Reid poll, which admittedly is a year old, but I suspect it hasn't changed at all. This is the trust people have in Canadian professions. The percentage of Canadians who say they trust firefighters is very high, 88%. Doctors, 75%. Police officers, 57%. Chiropractors, 43%. And then appropriately at the bottom, TV and radio personalities.
Well, I notice you don't have lawyers up there. I think it'd probably be lower than TV and radio personalities.
They might be lower. That is true. The trust in police officers number, which is 57% there, has declined 12% since 2007. From your perspective, is that decline in trust in the police warranted?
Well, in a perfect world, there would be a complete sort of unity of the relationship between the public and the police. We'd be looking at 100%. But the reality is that the world has changed. And I think, if anything, the reality on this particular issue has changed for a couple of reasons. One is video. There's no doubt that the police are under a greater degree of scrutiny because of social media and other aspects of video that are outside of the area of social media. CCTV, surveillance cameras, internal police cameras that become public because of other criminal trials and lead the public, and sometimes we end up doing some of these investigations, to say, what's going on here? And I think also there's generally been less deference to authority in our society as time has gone on. So I think when you combine these two concepts, it means that you are going to end up with less deference to the police, who are really, in many ways, for the public, the ultimate authority and the most visible.
But would you say the police aren't necessarily any worse or more egregious at their jobs today, but they just get caught more because everybody's got a cell phone now?
That's a very difficult question because, of course, what's your comparator? How do you know? But I do know this. There is going to be more social media in this area. There's going to be more videotaping of police on the streets. And there's going to be more videotaping of both excessive and reasonable uses of force. And the public are going to be looking at this, and they're going to be making their own decisions on this issue. And say even 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't really that long ago. I mean, the world really changed probably with the Rodney King incident in the U.S., no doubt with the Robert Jacansky case in Vancouver with the tasering at the Vancouver airport. And of course, we have a very recent experience in this city with the Samu Team case.
Indeed.
And the reality is there's going to be more video, not less. So, my personal view of how the police should respond to this issue is they should embrace civilian oversight more than they do now, because they're not going to win this battle. This is going to end up in the public's eye, whether the police like it or not. So what's the way to deal with it? The way to deal with it is to guarantee that when there's serious injury and death cases, that they're thoroughly investigated by an independent agency that is transparent, that communicates its results to the public. I think in many ways, and some of the police will disagree with me on this point, the police and the SIU are in the same business. We're in the business of public trust, facilitating public trust in the police. They view it perhaps a little differently than I, but I think the more sophisticated, the good leaders are going to say, look, we're in the same business. And the way to deal with this issue is for the good leaders of policing to embrace civilian oversight and embrace the SIU.
Would the SIU be a less effective organization if, let's say, a former police chief were the head of it instead of a former Crown Attorney?
Yes, it would be. The reason being is that they could do exactly the same investigations, exactly the same argument that used to happen before the SIU existed. There were no doubt very, very good internal investigations of death and serious injury cases by, say, Toronto, or if Toronto wanted to, they could have got the OPP to go in and do Toronto. But at the end of the day, it's a question of public trust. The investigation, the pile of paper could be equally as high on both sides. It could be the same interviews, the same forensics.
But cops interviewing cops just doesn't have the public trust.
In my view, it doesn't have the same degree of public trust.
Okay. 23 years the SIU's been around.
Yes.
Who is the longest serving director of the SIU?
You're looking at him.
I'm looking at him. I know I am. So you should have a lot to say about how this organization could actually be more effective going forward.
Yes, I do.
I want to get into that now if I can. When police go and do their jobs, they have to take notes on what they do.
Yes.
What do you think should happen with those notes?
I think those notes should be like the notes we see in your average criminal case, should be as independent and contemporaneous as possible.
Meaning what?
It means that when a police officer is either a witness or involved in an incident, they do what they do in every other case. They get out the notepad and they write it out. And the question is, how do you weigh the reliability of notes? And in my view, and to some degree I'm supported by the criminal justice system on this, the way you weigh it and the most reliable notes, the ones you're going to believe the most, are going to be the ones that are most independent. In other words, I didn't talk to my buddy about what my buddy saw. Mm-hmm. This is what I saw. And they're also done as contemporaneously or as soon to the event as possible. Because that's when our memory is the best.
Do you have access to those notes now?
Yes.
And what change in policy would you like to see regarding that, where you think your organization could be even more effective?
Well, and I've been kind of on this issue ever since I got involved with the SIU. What I found out very early on, I didn't quite realize this was going on, was that particularly in large urban areas, Toronto was a very good example, the police, I'm not quite sure who was calling them, but there were police association lawyers at the scene of these incidents, sometimes even before the SIU got there. And they were assisting all of the officers to write up their notes. And in my view, this flew in the face of both the independence of those notes and sometimes the contemporaneous aspects, because there could be delays in those notes.
They would sanitize a little, if you like.
Well, I'm not sure.
Maybe get their story straight, whatever.
Well, I mean, one may have certain suspicions, but the problem is this. How do you get to the bottom of it? You don't know, because you can't really question either the police officer about the solicitor-client communication, and we do not have the power to have the lawyer come and give a statement.
On the other hand, the police officer taking those notes might very well say, I have the potential of incriminating myself in my own notes, and self-incrimination, you know, we don't like that in the justice system, right?
We don't like that, but you see, the SIU is not allowed to see the subject officer's notes, only if they give them to us voluntarily. My real concern is to deal with the police witnesses. You know, let's take a sort of, you know, simple example. You have one police officer who uses a firearm, and there are two or three other officers present. The officer that uses the firearm, we don't get to see his notes or interview him unless it's voluntary. But with the police witness, they are compelled, according to law, to produce their notes and to give us a statement. So, I mean, let's take a lot of scenes where there's no videotape. And, you know, if there's videotape, it's very nice. But let's face it, at this point, you can't be assured there's going to be a videotape. So what do you really rely upon? Well, it's really not that different than a lot of other criminal investigations. You rely upon your witnesses. And the cleaner that the notes are, because the statement that's taken from the police witness will be based upon their notes. There should be very much a consistency between the notes and their oral statement.
The police officer who may be at the center of an SIU investigation because he or she may have broken the law, is that police officer allowed at the moment to be represented by a lawyer?
Yes.
Would you like to see a change in that?
I have no difficulty with them being represented by a lawyer. What I'm asking is simply this, that when they write up their notes, either as a subject officer or as a witness officer, they write up their notes independently. And if a subject officer wants to have his notes reviewed by a lawyer and receive advice as to whether or not he should give a statement to the SIU, that's perfectly okay. That's the way our system of criminal justice works, where if there's a risk of self-incrimination, you have the right not to incriminate yourself. I have no difficulty with that. But when it comes to the witness officer, he or she has no criminal jeopardy. And the way to understand the facts is to guarantee that when they write up their notes, they are independent, contemporaneous, and they come in and give a statement.
So you do not want you do not want the witnessing officer to be able to have his or her own lawyer in that circumstance.
Correct. Correct.
Right now they can.
Right now they do. That's correct. I'd like to see that change in the legislation.
Now, if I were a cop, I could. I mean, I see why they have a lot of trouble with that.
Oh,
they
yes.
want somebody representing them too.
Sure, they do. But in my view, there's a more important principle at play here. The most important principle is that we get the investigative agency get the best facts they possibly can. And let me add a couple other points. So one is the witness officer has no jeopardy, number one. And you got to remember that police officers take statements all the time from people who don't have lawyers beside them. That's actually a pretty standard investigation.
You, at the moment, unlike, let's say, the Ombudsman, unlike the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, unlike the Privacy Commissioner for Ontario, unlike the Auditor General of Ontario, you don't report to the legislature. You report to the Ministry of the Attorney General.
I actually think, I think, did you include the Ombudsman in the list? I think the Ombudsman does report to the legislature.
Yeah, the Ombudsman's on the list.
Yes. Okay, sorry, yes, you're absolutely right. Yes.
Ombudsman,
yes.
Auditor General, Information and Privacy
You're
Commissioner,
absolutely right. You're absolutely
Environmental Commissioner. I think those are the main four.
I think you got them.
But you don't.
I don't, that's
You're
correct.
not appointed by Parliament, you're appointed by the Attorney General.
Well, it is an order in council by the government. I mean, it is a cabinet decision, but you're absolutely right. But the way it works is that we are a unit of the Ministry of the Attorney General.
You know where I'm going with this.
I know where you're going with this.
Do you think? I mean, do you think you would be perceived as having greater independence if you reported to the legislature as a whole, which is obviously all three parties at the moment, as opposed to just the governing party?
Yes, I do. I think the reporting structure should be the same as the Ombudsman and the other people you've represented. And there's also some precedent in other provinces. In British Columbia, they have the Office of the Public Complaints Commissioner, which is a little different than what the SIU does. But the point is that it deals with the issue of police issues, police complaints, and it reports directly to the British Columbia legislature. So there's precedents, not only the ones you mentioned, but in other provinces for this to take place.
And just, for the heck of it, what's the concern that the head of the SIU reports directly to the Attorney General? What might that be a concern about?
Well, as documented in the second Ombudsman's report, there was some attempt to suppress, for example, my annual report, the first annual report that I published, the 2008-09 report, which, by the way, is now available online. And the sun seemed to rise in the east and set in the west even after the report became public.
But just go into some of the detail there. You wanted to put a report out.
I did.
And you heard from the Attorney General's people that?
Well, I heard that it wasn't going to be published. I was not permitted to publish it. And what I did in that report, and every year the director of the SIU issues an annual report. It has a lot of stats and talks a bit about some of the issues of the particular year. But what I concentrate on were a couple of issues we've already talked about. One being the notes issue, the other being the fact that there's not a unified definition of serious injury across the province, which I think is a problem when you have provincial legislation. There's different reporting standards depending on what police service you went to. And the third related to my attempt to develop a protocol with police services to identify problems with the SIU compliance. And what I was doing was writing letters to the chiefs and asking for a response, because I have no ability to require a response. So those are the three issues I mentioned, and I obviously, ruffled a few feathers with those three issues. And the suggestion was very strongly made that I not publish that report.
By whom?
Well, it was an assistant deputy minister. I don't really want to name the individual.
No, but that's what I'm trying to get. Does the Attorney General actually come to you and say, you know what,
no.
It doesn't go that high?
No, it doesn't. I mean, the accountability process is through an assistant deputy minister.
Okay.
Yes.
And they went to you and they said, boy, we'd really appreciate it if you didn't. Or do they tell you we're not publishing?
Well, it was kind of a funny thing, actually. What I did was, part of my memorandum of understanding, which is like the agreement that we have, said I had to table an annual report every year. So we published a report. It was a nice report, has flowery and color photographs and everything.
But tabling doesn't mean making public necessarily.
Well, I learned all that. I had no idea what tabling meant. I had no idea. I mean,
big loophole there.
Exactly. And I kept phoning and saying, well, has the report been tabled? I didn't know. Does it literally mean you put it on a table somewhere? I wasn't quite sure. But I could never really get an answer. But ultimately, over a period of, it was months and months and months. And eventually I was told, look, I really want to get this report out. We have outreach people that use the report to explain what the SIU does, and they want to get it out. We want to get it up on the website.
But bottom line is, if you presented it to the legislature as a whole instead of just the government, that couldn't be suppressed, because obviously if a government tried to suppress it, the opposition wouldn't allow that.
Well, you wouldn't think, you'd think that would make news.
Yeah.
I might be here for another reason.
Exactly.
I think that would be a newsworthy item.
Let me follow up on one other thing you just mentioned in that last answer. This notion of we don't agree around Ontario what constitutes a serious injury worth your attention.
Correct.
How can that be?
Well, I know it's incredible to me. I mean, when I went there, what happened was there was the first director was a retired judge named Justice John Osler, who's now passed away, but he was the first director of the SIU. This is in 1990, when it was just getting off the ground. And the SIU's changed a lot, but what he did was he developed a protocol with some of the major police agencies of a definition of serious injury, which we call the Osler definition. And I don't want to bore you with it, but it kind of boils down to kind of broken bones. But when I got there, it was funny. We got this complaint. I can't recall what it was. It seemed it was a broken finger or broken thumb from a police agency. Sorry, we didn't get it from the police agency. We got it from some other source, and I can't recall what it was. It was either the media or probably his lawyer. He phoned directly in, and we looked into it. No criminal charges laid. I wrote a letter to the police service at the time. It was the Barrie Police Service. I got a very nice letter back saying the reason we didn't notify you was because we don't use the Osler definition. I went like, what's going on here? This is crazy, because we have one province. We should have a unitary set of laws. You shouldn't have to sort of drag the body across the county line to find out that you're not going to phone the SIU. It should be the same across the province. So that's one of the issues I actually raised in that first report. One of the issues that, going back to the question of how do you make the SIU better, there should be a legislative definition of serious injury. Okay,
you've written up all of these ideas that we've just been talking about here into a nice report, and you've presumably presented that to the government of Ontario.
They have a copy, but actually it was written more as an academic piece, really, for the Criminal Law Quarterly, which is an academic journal.
Okay. Do you have any, I think John Garrettson's the Attorney General today, isn't he?
Yes.
Have you talked to him about this, and is he?
No, I haven't.
You haven't?
No.
Do you want to?
Oh, I'd love to. My objective is really to make the SIU a better place. I would like to see it become more independent, more accountable, and more transparent. Because I think ultimately the public of this province will benefit, and the police, they may need a little nudging in this area, they will benefit too.
Just finally, what are you going to do now?
I'm going to open a practice. I've been a defense lawyer before. I've run a criminal practice before. Do that in administrative law, some police governance issues, and that's what I'm planning to do in October, later in the month.
You'll still be butting heads with cops, in other words.
Well, it's kind of the nature of the beast when you get into the criminal law area.
Right on. Ian Scott, it's awfully good of you to come into TVO tonight and share your thoughts on your 5 years at the helm of the SIU. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.